Welcome to the Leading with Instinct podcast, where we dive deep into leadership, personal growth, and how the intuitive nature of horse herd dynamics can give you the tools you need to lead with confidence and clarity. I'm Ginny Telego.
And I'm Katie Navarra-Bradley.
This is the Leading with Instinct podcast, focusing on intuitive leadership and fostering deep team connections through equine experiential leadership development and coaching. Brought to you by KatieTheCoach.com and the Collaboration Partners. Now, here's your hosts, Katie Navarra-Bradley and Ginny Telego.
All right. Well, welcome back to the Leading with Instinct podcast. Great to see you, Katie. So happy that we're back here today again. And we just wondered, have you ever felt like your team just isn't getting it? You know, even though you thought you were really clear, maybe you gave a lot of information to them, but for some odd reason, whatever they bring back to you isn't what you had envisioned in your mind. Or maybe you've been given a project without all the information you need to meet the outcome, and you were totally surprised when, you showed up. It was like, handing in your paper in school and you thought you wrote this great paper, and then the teacher comes back and gives you a D, right? And you're like, what happened? So today we're going to dive into a question that we think is important for organizations as they're navigating recruiting and retention in their workforce. Are you actually preparing people for what you expect of them? So, Katie, you ready?
Yes, I love this topic for today, Ginny, because I feel like we have all been in that place where either we've gotten feedback that we did not accomplish what was expected, or reverse, we've led a project and not received what we expected from those around us. What I also really love about this topic today is that it came from your recent attendance at a Buck Brannaman clinic, which I have to say I'm still a little envious that you got to attend one. For our listeners who may not know who he is a legend in the horse world, a horse trainer and clinician who is known for working with the horse's natural instincts and focusing on how horses think and communicate so humans can develop a better partnership with their horses. And that just connects so perfectly to what we do.
So, yeah, Katie, I know it's a perk of living in Colorado. This clinic was only 90 minutes from where I live, so I was able to just drive up for the day and go with a friend of mine. And when I lived in Ohio, I would have had to travel for several days to get to a Buck Brannaman clinic. So I feel really fortunate to have the opportunity to go and do those things. But, there were a lot of nuggets that I pulled from him as he was coaching the riders in this clinic. And the one thing that he said that just really stuck with me that led us to this topic for today is he said, you have to prepare the horse for what you expect them to do. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I don't know. There was all kinds of things. My brain was just like lighting up and like fireworks coming out of my head. And I thought, wow, we do the same thing with people, right? We so often we have expectations of them to perform, to hit goals, collaborate. But, are we actually preparing them to be able to succeed at those things? And so I just thought it was so relevant when he said that. It hit with all the work that you and I do in our leadership and team development work with the horses and how that shows up. So I'm looking forward to exploring that. But yeah, when I shared that topic with you, well, I think you saw it on my Facebook page. I shared it. And so what was your thought when you saw that?
Well, we had been talking about what our next topic would be for the podcast. And so I just follow all of your fun activities. When I saw you post that, I thought, oh, here we are. This is the topic that we need to talk about. And we hope that all of you as listeners get as excited about it as we do as we go through this, because it was really one of those powerful insight moments that we all kind of experience as leaders. Sometimes unintentionally, sometimes we just get so busy. So we're going to share some thoughts on this and some steps to help kind of better prepare your team, your staff for what you are expecting of them.
Yeah. And I really do think one of the things we talked about, Katie, is this ability to make sure that you're clear in your expectations as perhaps a little bit of a gap in a lot of people's leadership skills. And so one of the things that we wanted to talk about was like, why does this gap exist? Why does this expectation gap exist? And And as I was putting these thoughts together for our conversation, it just made me think a little bit about how, I spent a long time working with young horses in particular, and I see this with people with their dogs, and all the time, right? You hear people say, "You know better than that." When the horse does something, dog does something, and it's not maybe something that we wanted, right? It's not what we had in our head. And our reaction is, oh, you know better than that. And I've started asking myself a long time ago, and this really reinforced it. I was like, do they? Do they know better than what they're doing? And so this just really hit me of why this gap might exist. And I think the number one reason why it exists is this thing called assumption bias. So in our work, Katie and I do, we talk a lot with our clients about their beliefs, assumptions, and perceptions about what's happening with the horses, about themselves, about their team. And that's really the basis of how we help people to move from where they are to where they want to be. And so I think we've all experienced this, and oftentimes managers assume that employees know what the expected outcome is of every task. But a lot of time they don't, especially if they're newer into the workforce. They don't have the context that someone more experienced has. And so I know I've experienced this in my work life. It's incredibly frustrating. I hate it when someone says, why didn't you do blah, 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 whatever, right? And I'm like, I didn't realize that's what you expected me to do, right? Because apparently I'm supposed to read their mind.
If only we were mind readers, life would be easier, right?
I know, right? Yes and no sometimes, right? Or I'm making assumptions based on the information that I've been given. And then I get irritated when I'm told the result I've achieved isn't the right one. And so there's assumptions happening on both sides of the conversation that oftentimes are preventing us from getting the outcome that they want.
Mm-hmm. Well, it reminds me of that old saying that I was raised as a child with, what happens when you assume, right? I won't break it down here, but you can pretty much figure out what that might be. But, you mentioned that this can especially happen with new hires or younger employees who are just coming into our organizations. Nobody defines success for them. What does that look like? And then when they don't hit the mark, we blame them. Like to your point about the animals, well, you should know better. Well, should they know better? Because if we haven't told them, how are they going to know better? And this whole idea of assumption bias really ties into our previous episode, Let Go of Assumptions, where we really talked a lot about leading multi-generational teams and the assumptions that come up about each generation and how that can hinder our relationships and also offer opportunities to leverage those skill sets for greater productivity and efficiency in our organizations. And expectations are one of those factors. And as we were putting together some notes for this, it reminded me of a conversation I had with a client I was working with for some thought leadership projects. And he said to me that younger generations, even more so than previous generations, want a confirmation of what those expectations are before they launch into a project. And part of it's just the way that our schools have changed, our societies have changed. And he is also a professor in addition to being a coach, and he ran this experiment on his Gen Z students. And even though I'm a little older than Gen Z, I thought, oh my God, I would have panicked myself if my professor did this. But he handed out an ambiguous syllabus. There were few details, no dates, deadlines. If you remember back to your college days, those syllabuses were pages and pages long with all of the dates throughout the semester listed. And what he found was this group of high-performing students who were used to getting GPAs, they were struggling. Not only were they struggling, they were stressed out. There was tension in the classroom. They missed their quote-unquote checklist. And so while I'm not advocating that we tell our employees exactly how to do their job every day, because that then takes away our innovation and collaboration, I think it just highlights how we do have to provide some definition of expectations so that everyone knows they're working towards the same goals.
Yeah, I think that's such a great example, Katie. When I read that in our notes before today, and I was like, oh my gosh, yeah. And I think it speaks to our brain's uncomfortableness with uncertainty. And so, looking at an ambiguous syllabus would have given me anxiety as a student because of the lack of clarity. That would have triggered my brain into a threat mode with thoughts like, oh my God, what if I'm late with an assignment and I fail the class and I don't graduate and I can't get a job? And right, the catastrophizing all starts, and which creates anxiety. And so understanding that, I think from that perspective, even it's not that we're coddling people by being clear in our expectations. We're actually providing their brain with what it needs for them to operate at a high level and to perform at their highest, which is what I hear my clients want their people to do. So, I see this all the time in my equine experiential leadership and team development workshops. And I, Katie, I'm sure you see the same thing, right? I give participants information on a task to do with the horse, like move the horse to a specific location in the arena without anything attached to the horse, like a halter and a lead rope. So the horse has agency to go where they want them to go or to not go there. And at some point, the people will start to become frustrated only because they think the horse should know what they want it to do. I mean, that's so fascinating to me, is that people have this expectation that the horse will just come with them without any clarity of information of like, what direction are we going? And are we going fast? Are we going slow? What's the energy? And so, participants are doing all kinds of things to try and get the horse to move. And the horse just stands there because the horse is trying to fill in the blanks to find certainty. Right? And the people are trying to fill in the blanks to find certainty because that's what makes our brain comfortable. And so it leads to really powerful conversations about communicating with clarity and conversations about whether everyone on the team understands the plan. And so, just if we think about it from that perspective of it really is, our brain really needs to have some clarity in order to figure out what direction to go.
You're right. I do see that a lot in the programs that we run also. People are eager to jump in because they want to be engaged and involved. And then they realize, oh, we don't really even know what we're doing. So I see that too. And, to add to that, there's a lot of pressure that's going on related to time. Leaders are busy. Their teams are busy. Leaders in particular are kind of always in firefighting mode. At least it seems that way in this current world that we're living in. And so taking those extra few minutes for preparing the team is hard to find in the daily schedule. They just don't have the time to set out that quick direction, and they instead just hope that their team gets it right. And, hope is really not a strategy for success.
That's a great statement. And yeah, I think people think that they're being efficient, right? Because like you said, time is there's a lot of pressure there. They're in firefighting mode. They just are like, oh, here, take this. How about this? Hey, do this. Just go run with it. How about that for clarity? Like, if you say that to me, I'm going to be like, okay, great. All my creative thinking is gonna come into play, and I'm going to dive into that. And then if I come back to you with that end product and you look at it and you're like, what? We didn't even talk about this. And I'm going to say, but this is the information you gave me, and then you told me to run with it. Right? And so I think we have to really balance out, what are we sacrificing when we think we're saving time or we're being efficient? Usually it's clarity, right? Mm-hmm. We're not taking the time to just be really clear about what does success look like, whether we're the person giving the information, whether we're the person that's asking someone else, or if they're the person receiving it. Again, both sides have responsibility to gain clarity and make sure that what's in your mind, whichever side of the conversation you're on, whatever the picture is in your brain, the other person at least has some idea of what that is.
That's an excellent point, that it's a two-sided conversation. And we'll get into some more of that later, but I also just want to go to the leader side of that equation. To be fair, many of us who end up in leadership roles don't receive leadership training.
Mm-hmm.
People often get promoted because they're great individual contributors, but leading others really takes a whole new skill set. One organization that I worked with was famous for doing this. Promotions were made based on longevity and hierarchy rather than management and leadership skills. And there were some really talented people in there. So please, I'm not talking badly about their skills, but they were not prepared to lead others. And as one of 3 employees on the team in the department, it was incredibly frustrating that expectations, especially around deadlines and workflow, were inconsistent. For me, it led to the breaking point that I was like, this is it. I'm out. I need to find another job. And it created a tension that snowballed into just not being able to function in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have to say, even myself as someone who is obsessed with participating in leadership trainings, I've done every academy out there and I still pay lots of dollars to do it. I know that it can also be easy to fall into that trap as a leader. Even when we try to be intentional and be clear, some of the things we've already talked about, like time. I know for me, I just assume things are going to come out of my brain and magically appear in somebody else's, and they will know exactly what I'm thinking. So it's something that we always have to be conscious of. And to your point about working with young horses, I have 2 of them right now. They emphasize to me that if I am not clear in what I'm asking them to do, they just don't know what to do. And we end up not performing what I had in my mind. So, we're all human and we're really all learning along the way. So give yourself some grace.
Yes, I love that. And that is important for us to remember, because we all are going to make mistakes and not do things exactly right. But thanks for sharing that, Katie. I really appreciate, just you sharing your experience in the workplace and also with your horses. And it makes me think of a conversation I had yesterday with a coaching client who was sharing with me that she recently read an article about companies that are putting younger people who have high technology and AI skills, putting them into leadership roles. And their thinking behind it is, we need to have people who are comfortable with AI and exploring all of its capabilities. We need to have them out front leading, right? And helping us to figure out, how do we stay ahead of our competitors? How do we utilize AI to streamline what we're doing, our systems, our processes, our operations, all of those things. And so I can see why that would be a decision that would make sense. And I think it is important to make sure that you have people who are comfortable with changing technology, especially at the rate and the pace it's changing, that those people have a seat at the table when you're developing strategy. And also, you do have to also make sure that those people are being intentionally prepared to lead others, because this goes back to something we've talked about with the individual contributors piece, but also, like you were saying earlier, Katie, about people being put into leadership roles because they're really good at their technical skill job. And so, if companies aren't intentionally investing in leadership development that is preparing those folks to lead others, it's going to have a negative impact on the culture, because they won't have the skills to lead their teams effectively. There's going to be all kinds of miscommunication happening. Assumption bias will probably be over the top, right? Because the person who is looking at, all of the technology things and how do we innovate and how do we stay ahead of our competitors, that's where their focus is. They're not thinking about, is the information I'm sharing with my people the right information? Is it what they need? So yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Katie? And maybe how do we fix it?
Those are all really good points, Ginny. And I think you're right. We've kind of talked a lot about this challenge. So really, what are next steps? How do we fix it? And how do we bring some of those skills in and help our leaders level up? So one of the first things that I think helps set expectations is to start in the interview. If you're hiring and onboarding new employees, explain those key performance indicators in the interview. Talk about how they're discussed in the organization, whether that's through one-on-ones, town halls, however that happens. Make sure that these people coming on board know how important the expectations are before they even get into the organization. It helps set them up for success, help them understand what you're expecting out of employees who become a part of the team.
Yeah, I think that is so important. And that is a great action step. In our last episode, we talked about how horse herds are always preparing other herd members to step into leadership roles. And all herd members understand that they have a role in the health, harmony, and unity of the herd. And so the expectations are very clear. They don't have to go to a training or even have a meeting really to discuss it, although sometimes there are those conversations between horses of if a horse is not behaving in a way that is in the best interest of the herd, another herd member in a leadership role will have a horse conversation with them. But and I think as part of setting expectations for people, it's really vitally important to also set context around those expectations, right? It's not just about the tasks. If we can help people connect their daily work to the bigger picture of what is happening and what they're doing, then that can really make a difference. And if people know how their work impacts the company's goals or their customer experience, we find that people are much more invested, and they may feel more comfortable being able to ask for clarity. I don't know. What do you think, Katie?
Yes, I agree with you. Once people feel connected to a bigger goal, I mean, I speak from my own experience. I can get excited about it and I can know why we're moving in a specific direction. So using examples like when I ask somebody to prepare this report, this is a customer report that isn't just about busy work. It's helping support our customer experience strategy for Q3, so that they really understand how it's impacting the customers that you're serving, so that over the long term, they continue to buy and stay loyal to the brand. It's also talking about how achieving goals impacts things like being able to hire more people. If teams are stretched thin, understanding that it can help bring them relief can also help buy-in. Maybe even things like year-end bonuses, being recognized as a leader in the industry, helping people see that it's more than just the task, to your point, can really bring them into the fold for sure.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And another piece of this around expectations is we have to have shared language around the expectations. And again, I think this comes back to, we all filter everything through our own knowledge, skills, experience, things like that. So we have to define, what does quote unquote done look like, right? What does success look like? I recently had a colleague who was sharing a situation between two team members in her company where they were working on a project together. They each thought they understood what the outcome needed to be. And this was such a great example for us. So timing was perfect. So when one of the team members sent the finished product to the other team member, who was the decision maker, things got a little heated because the decision maker came back and said, "That's not what I told you. Like, that's not what I was thinking at all." And so the team member who had just worked and spent many hours on this project, felt defeated, felt attacked, didn't understand, where's this coming from, that type of thing. And so, we can avoid this kind of unproductive energy by inviting our team to tell us what they think success looks like, or, right, okay, now I've just explained to you my vision for this project. Can you come back to me? Let me know what you see. Like, what do you hear me saying? What does this picture look like to you? And then clarify that that's what you need and want. We have an exercise that we do sometimes with the horses where we put people in pairs, and one person has a card that has a picture, some kind of a picture on it, of a diagram, right? A drawing of some kind of shape. And the other person is with the horse. And the person with the shape card has to explain to the person leading the horse how to make that, right? It's about making your vision visible, expressing that information, and it's very interesting to watch how that transpires, because the person who's leading the horse can't ask any questions. They can only do what the person with the shape card tells them. And it really shows how oftentimes we have a vision in our head of what something looks like, but the people that are executing it, they don't have that same picture. Now, if the person with the shape card showed that picture to the person who was executing the task before they went, then whatever the person with the card is explaining would make total sense, right? It comes back to what we were just saying about giving people the context around things. So this thinking about it from that perspective, to me, really brings home how important that is.
As I was listening to you share about that, two things really stuck out to me was the concept of done. What does done look like? And also creating space for people to ask for that clarification. I believe that inherently everyone wants to do well and wants to succeed. I don't think that they are going astray because they want the project to fail, but sometimes asking for clarification can feel intimidating because it's admitting, I don't know what to do. And that can be hard to admit that to our boss or to our group of peers who we might think less of us for doing that. And I see this in the equine workshops too. Similar to one of the earlier activities that you mentioned, I put letters on the wall, and I tell them that they have to, work as a group to get the horse to move through the letters, but I don't tell them how to do that or which order to go in or what is even done. And they are so eager that they jump in and they start doing, and then all of a sudden they realize we don't really know what we're doing. And so it becomes this conversation point of, well, how come you didn't ask? You have two experts in the ring. You have the facilitator and the horse handler or horse support person. You can ask them for clarification on what you're doing before jumping in. And as soon as you say that, the light bulb goes off in their head. And depending on what time of day that is in the program, they then ask you every time in every activity, oh, can we ask you for clarification? So it's really interesting to see that play out throughout the course of the day, working with the horses.
Yeah. And I see that all the time as well. And the horses are always like, what are we doing? Right. We're not sure of what's happening. So they either just stand and don't move, or they just wander off into another part of the arena. And that's really what's happening with our people, right? When we're not clear. And I love that you talk about sort of the psychological safety around being able to ask for clarification. And what are the beliefs, assumptions, perceptions within your organizational culture about asking for clarification? Because if it's seen in some way as a weakness, right? Oh gosh, well, if you're asking questions, you don't know what you're doing. How do we shift that to, wow, if you're asking questions, that's awesome, because that tells me that you want to do the best job possible. It tells me that you want to help me achieve the vision that I have in my head. And so being able to shift that, I think, is a huge thing for people to do as well. And some of that could come through, another step you can do is this reinforcing things through regular feedback, right? Don't wait until somebody's performance review. You've heard this. I've heard people talk about this over and over again. So don't wait until the semi-annual or the people's annual performance review to give them feedback. But like we were talking about earlier, Katie, you had talked about sort of this time thing, right? This time pressure. I don't have time to check in with my people. Or the belief, assumption, perception that checking in with people more frequently is that you have to do that because they're not capable. They need babysitting. If I think you need babysitting, if that's the perception I have of checking in with you, I'm going to treat you a certain way. If instead I think of, more often check-ins, and check-ins really are just that, just a check-in. How are you tracking on this goal? How are things going? Because if you're doing that, you're actually helping yourself to get to the end result that you're looking for. It's important that we're asking the people who are executing things for us if they have clarity of what is expected. And if they don't take it personally. If they say to you, I'm not quite sure of what exactly it is that you're asking for. I just had this happen, a project that I'm working on with a client, and I got an email from my person on their end asking me for something, and I can tell you that my brain just was like, I am not clear on what it is that you're asking, because in my mind, I had already done all of that. I had answered those questions. I had a spreadsheet, all kinds of things. And so you know what I did? Well, first I got curious. I was like, I wonder what she's really looking for, maybe that I didn't provide. And so guess what? I responded and I just said, I'm not really clear about what you're asking for here. That was what I said. And then I explained, I said, I think this information is in the spreadsheet that I provided. And so when she came back, it was good. Now, if I had interpreted that differently, or if I had, thought, oh gosh, I'm stupid, whatever those things are that we all tell ourselves when somebody asks for clarity. But if I hadn't asked for clarity, then that conversation could have gone in a whole other direction that might not have been productive for our collaboration. And so, we really need to get curious, ask the person what their interpretation is of the expectation. And then, if we're the person who's asking, then we need to figure out how do we fill in the gaps that person has in what we're asking. So do they need training for additional skills? Do they just need clearer information? Do I need to communicate in a different way? All of those things. So we really have to ask ourselves the question, if we're in the leadership role, how can I make sure that my people have the tools and the training to meet my expectations?
Mm-hmm. That's such an excellent point. And, one of the things I wanted to add to that is email is really an efficient way to communicate, and we do all need to use email in our lives. But sometimes when I get into those really sticky points with a client, pick up the phone, jump on a Zoom call, because it's right. Exactly. I don't like Zoom necessarily, but have a verbal conversation of some sort, because email, text messaging, Slack messaging are all great for things that can be answered quickly and on the fly. But sometimes when we realize that we're not aligned on the goal or the outcome, it just starts to compound the program or the problem when it starts going in writing, right? Because it can be construed in so many different ways that can really get us off the rail. And when you were talking about this, I know you own your own business, but it really makes me think about how this whole conversation applies to us as entrepreneurs too, not just leaders in organizations, but we have to prepare the clients that we're working with by setting expectations and checking in with them. I always like to hold a kickoff call with a first-time client, or if I have a client where we're doing a project that is very different than our normal scope of work, where it's pretty well defined. And I just get really curious asking them things like, what does success look like for you? And sometimes I don't even use the word success because it can be a little ambiguous. So I dig in a little bit more and say, what do you want to achieve when we finish this content project? What do you want people to do after they see XYZ or read XYZ? And what are some of the biggest pain points that we need to address? And that starts to help them share the details that they don't realize I might need, so that we can then create a product that really hits on the goals that they're aiming to, or the investment that they're making.
Yes, that's so powerful. 'Cause really getting that desired result, right? What is the desired result that you want is such an important part of the conversation. Well, so we've been talking about sort of why this is happening and giving our listeners some concrete action steps they can take. I think it's also important to understand, why does this even matter for your business outcomes, And so the thing we know is clear expectations don't just make people feel better. It's not a touchy-feely thing. It actually drives performance, right, Katie?
Yes, when your teams know what to expect, they can move faster, make better decisions, and produce higher quality work.
Yeah. And when expectations are unclear, it's expensive. Missed deadlines, duplicated work, turnover, all of it. It all impacts the bottom line for our organizations. And unclear expectations can create drama in teams, which is definitely not something that is helpful to your bottom line. So it's really worth taking the time to ensure that people not only understand what's expected of them, but they have the tools to meet those expectations.
I think the tools piece is also equally important as we talk about this. And you had shared an article with me before our conversation today by PwC, and I really feel like they said it best, that unless employees understand and help drive change, the transformation plans are unlikely to succeed.
Yeah, right. Goes back to us helping them see how what they do is also impacting the bigger, vision and strategies. So yeah, preparing your employees is not optional. It's foundational to meeting your strategic and financial goals.
We have covered a lot today, Ginny. So I thought that we should wrap with a few quick tools that any manager, any leader, any business owner can use right now. So here's a few tips for your toolbox this week. Practice in your conversation with your team members or your clients and see what happens. So the first one is, this is what success looks like, and ask them to fill in the blank. Really get curious about how they see the project playing out. The second question is, or second statement is, here's how this connects to our team goals. And then be specific. Talk to them about how it aligns with the strategic plan and projects that are really driving customer experience and profitability for the company. When you're all done in these conversations, ask them, on a scale of 1 to 10, how clear are you on what's expected? That's really going to give you insight into, are we tracking in the same direction, or are they maybe a little intimidated to speak up, and here's a chance to be able to answer some of those questions they might not have asked.
I love that last one, Katie, and I'm thinking about how I might utilize that in my leadership development and coaching work with the horses, and ask my client, say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how clear do you think the horse is on what's expected?
Exactly.
So yeah, if your team isn't meeting your expectations, ask yourself, have I actually set expectations for them that are clear, right? Am I preparing them for what I expect? And if you haven't, there's no shame in it, right? It takes practice. You can start now with all the things that we have shared with you. Set context for people. Invite questions from them. Let them know that asking questions is not a sign of weakness. And just check in with them a little more regularly, whatever that. And you could even ask people, here's an idea. How about if you ask your person, what would be helpful to you in me checking in? Would you like me to check in once a week? Would you like me to check in a couple times a month? How frequently within this project or whatever you're doing? It's okay to be curious about that.
Ginny, that's great advice. And also even asking, what's holding you back from achieving XYZ? Because that will uncover some really interesting feedback as well. But be sure to combine those expectations with the genuine belief that the person you're working with or the team, that they're going to accomplish those outcomes. The majority of people want to meet, even exceed expectations. They just need a clear vision or a clear idea of your vision as the leader to get there. And so when we start from that place of assuming good from the people we're working with, chances are we're all going to align better, faster, and achieve higher outcomes.
Yes. Oh, Katie, this has been such a great conversation. I'm just so excited that we jumped on this, and big thanks to Buck Brandeman for getting us started on that topic. So this is a wrap on today's conversation on how leaders can ensure that they're preparing their people for what they expect. We hope the episode has provided some helpful insights about how you can use wisdom from the horses to create a more engaged team. And we'd love to hear from you. What's worked for you when it comes to setting expectations, or what are some of the challenges that you're finding? So let's keep the conversation going. Share your thoughts with us on social media or in the comments. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe, review, and leave a review and share it with your network. So until next time, stay grounded, stay connected, and always lead with instinct.
This has been the Leading with Instinct podcast, focusing on intuitive leadership and fostering deep team connections through equine experiential leadership development and coaching. The Leading with Instinct podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Collaboration Partners, harnessing the collective human potential in organizations since 2009, providing equine experiential learning for lasting change. Get in touch at thecollaborationpartners.com and by katiethecoach.com, helping entrepreneurs and business leaders reset, reconnect, and reframe to live their best professional and personal lives. Visit katiethecoach.com for more information. For more information about equine experiential development and coaching and the Leading with Instinct podcast, visit www.leadingwithinstinct.com. The Leading with Instinct podcast is available at leadingwithinstinct.com, on the Leading with Instinct YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Subscribe today, and thank you for listening to the Leading with Instinct podcast.